The COVID-19 pandemic had significant environmental impacts globally, both positive and negative. The COVID-19 pandemic significantly reshaped the global environment, bringing both temporary benefits and long-term challenges. Let's examine these impacts in detail. Positive environmental impacts. Air quality improvement. Lockdowns led to a dramatic reduction in air pollution. In major cities, nitrogen dioxide, NO2, levels dropped by 30 to 50% due to decreased vehicle and industrial activity. Satellite images showed clearer skies over industrial hubs in China, Europe, and the US. Examples: India, Delhi, one of the most polluted cities, saw a 60% reduction in PM 2.5 levels. China, Wuhan, the pandemic's epicenter, recorded a 50% drop in NO2 pollution during the lockdown. Reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Global CO2 emissions dropped by 6-7% in 2020, the largest recorded decrease in history. Transport emissions fell by nearly 50% during peak lockdowns. Key stats: aviation emissions fell by 60% due to reduced flights. Industrial emissions declined as factories shut down. However, this reduction was temporary, as emissions rebounded after economies reopened. Cleaner water bodies. With fewer boats and industrial activities, rivers and oceans became cleaner. Venice's canals turned clear due to the absence of boat traffic. The Ganges River in India saw improved water quality with a 40-50% decrease in pollution levels. Wildlife flourishing. Animals roamed freely in human-occupied areas. Reduced tourism and human presence allowed marine and terrestrial ecosystems to recover. Examples: sea turtles nested on beaches undisturbed due to fewer tourists. Wildlife sightings increased in urban areas. Deer in Japan, dolphins near Italian coasts. Negative environmental impacts. Increased plastic and medical waste. Disposable face masks, gloves, PPE kits, and sanitizing products led to a global surge in plastic waste. 3.4 billion disposable masks were used daily worldwide. Many of these ended up in oceans, harming marine life. Example: a study estimated over 25,000 tons of pandemic-related plastic waste entered the ocean in 2020. Surge in medical waste. Hospitals worldwide generated millions of tons of medical waste, including syringes, test kits, and PPE. Poor disposal practices led to hazardous waste accumulation in developing countries. Energy and water consumption. The shift to work from home increased residential electricity and water consumption. Online shopping led to more packaging waste and increased carbon footprint from delivery services. Deforestation and illegal activities. With governments focusing on COVID-19, illegal deforestation, poaching, and mining surged. The Amazon rainforest saw an increase in illegal logging and fires as law enforcement weakened. Long-term environmental implications. Remote work and sustainable lifestyles. Many companies adopted permanent remote work policies, reducing daily commuting and emissions. Online meetings replaced unnecessary travel, cutting business aviation emissions. Policy shifts toward green recovery. Some countries invested in renewable energy and green infrastructure as part of post-pandemic economic recovery plans. The EU introduced a $750 billion recovery fund, partially focused on sustainability. Focus on waste management. Governments and businesses realized the urgent need for better plastic and medical waste disposal systems. Different countries took various approaches to address the environmental consequences of the pandemic. Some used the crisis as an opportunity to push green recovery initiatives, while others struggled with waste management and rising emissions post-lockdown. Countries that focused on green recovery. European Union, EU. Leading the green transition. Launched a $750 billion recovery plan, with a significant portion dedicated to climate action and renewable energy. Committed to reducing carbon emissions by 55% by 2030 under the European Green Deal. Invested heavily in electric vehicle, EV, infrastructure, and sustainable energy projects. Key actions. Increased funding for solar, wind, and hydrogen energy projects. Strengthened plastic waste regulations to tackle PPE-related pollution. Pushed for a circular economy with better waste management. China. Focus on renewable energy and pollution control. Despite being the world's largest CO2 emitter, China used the pandemic to accelerate its green transition. Invested in renewable energy projects and aimed for carbon neutrality by 2060. Strengthened regulations on plastic waste disposal, banning certain single-use plastics. Committed to 50% renewable energy use by 2030. Introduced new air pollution control measures in major cities. Banned non-degradable plastic bags in several provinces. United States. Mixed response. Initial COVID-19 response under the Trump administration focused on economic recovery without strong environmental policies. The Biden administration, 2021, rejoined the Paris Agreement and launched a $2 trillion climate plan. Expanded investments in clean energy, electric vehicles, and sustainable infrastructure. Passed the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA of 2022, which included $370 billion for climate and energy programs. Pledged to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. Strengthened waste management policies, including tackling medical waste pollution. Canada. Green stimulus packages. Canada committed to a net zero emissions target by 2050. Introduced $10 billion in green infrastructure funding, focusing on renewable energy and clean transportation. Invested in electric public transportation and zero-emission vehicle incentives. Strengthened regulations on single-use plastics. Allocated funds for reforestation and biodiversity conservation. Japan. Accelerating renewable energy goals. Pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050. Boosted investments in hydrogen energy and offshore wind projects. announced a $2 trillion green investment plan, phased out coal-fired power plants to cut emissions, launched initiatives for zero-emission transport systems. Countries that struggled with environmental challenges. India, air pollution and medical waste crisis. Despite temporary air quality improvements, pollution rebounded sharply post-lockdown. The country faced a huge increase in medical waste, with many cities struggling to manage PPE disposal. Focused on economic recovery, delaying some climate policies. Increased plastic pollution from disposable PPE. Massive rise in biomedical waste, straining waste management systems. Delayed progress on renewable energy goals due to economic setbacks. Brazil, deforestation surge. While global emissions temporarily dropped, Brazil saw record-high deforestation rates in the Amazon during the pandemic. With weakened law enforcement, illegal logging, mining, and wildfires increased. Amazon deforestation hit a 12-year high in 2020. Environmental regulations weakened, leading to habitat destruction. COVID-19 worsened conditions for indigenous communities in the Amazon. Russia delayed climate action. Initially opposed strict environmental regulations, prioritizing economic recovery. Continued heavy reliance on fossil fuels with limited renewable energy investments. Increased industrial emissions post-lockdown. Limited waste management solutions for rising plastic waste. Slow adoption of renewable energy policies. Long-term global trends. After COVID-19. Shift toward renewable energy. Many countries increased renewable energy investments post-pandemic. Solar and wind energy became more competitive, attracting global investments. Increased focus on waste management. The pandemic exposed weaknesses in plastic and medical waste disposal. Governments introduced stricter recycling and waste reduction policies. Rise of sustainable transportation. Electric vehicle (EV) adoption surged as governments promoted clean energy solutions. Public transport electrification accelerated in many developed countries. Strengthening global climate policies. Many nations revised their climate commitments under the Paris Agreement. The COP26 and COP27 climate summits focused on green recovery plans. The COVID-19 pandemic was a wake-up call for many countries to adopt more sustainable environmental policies. While some nations used the crisis to accelerate green recovery, others struggled with pollution, deforestation, and waste management. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a temporary environmental relief, but also highlighted major sustainability challenges. While air and water quality briefly improved, the surge in plastic waste, deforestation, and the quick rebound in emissions after lockdowns underscore the need for long-term environmental policies. Thanks for watching The Wild Camera Lens.